so much for watching the Youth Program Volunteer Training for school year 2019-2020. We are really excited to have you join our team, and as you know, at this point, all volunteers are required to watch this training, to fill out the corresponding worksheet, and to send it to Emily at SCNcommunitynetwork.org or Amanda at SCNcommunitynetwork.org before we can move forward with your onboarding process. We think it's really important, since you're working with our young people, that we're just all on the same page about what we do at our after-school program, and so we're really grateful that you're taking this time to kind of prepare before joining our team. So at this point, you've probably talked to Shireen, our education intern, but I want to do a couple of introductions about some of the rest of the staff that works with the education department. So my name is Emily Kane. I am the education director. I joined the team about a year ago. I have my cell and my email listed here if you should ever need to get a hold of me. We also have Amanda on our team. She is the youth coordinator. She actually works a little bit in the development department at SCN as well, but she will be at the after school program each day, and she helps just plan programming and run things. Her cell and email is also listed. We're going to talk about a few different things throughout this training. The first thing we're going to go through is the refugee resettlement process, just kind of as a whole. There could be days on the refugee resettlement process, and obviously things have changed a lot since the most recent administration has moved into office, and so a lot of what we're going to talk about actually is kind of at a standstill, but we're going to go through anyway so you can understand what the families have experienced prior to getting to Chicago. We're going to go over the youth services that we provide at SCN as a whole. We're going to talk about trauma-informed volunteering, and that's actually where we're going to end the training today, so we won't be doing number 4. So the first thing we want to talk about is, who are refugees? So I'm going to read this definition that is from UNHCR. A refugee is any person from outside the boundaries of his or her nation state who is unable or unwilling to return because of a well-founded fear of persecution based on religion, ethnicity, race, group membership, or political opinion. There are an estimated 65 million people in the world who are displaced and may be considered refugees. So now we're going to talk about what is resettlement. So what is this word that we hear a lot, but sometimes in an incorrect context or in a definition that is not aligned with legalities. And so we want to kind of set that straight about what that actually looks like when we're talking about folks that end up in Chicago. So for the most vulnerable people who are unable to return to their home country, the UNHCR will screen for resettlement into an accepting country. So this process will exclude anyone who has committed serious crimes or anyone that might be able to go back to their home country. Something that is good to clear up, and not everyone knows this, but refugees don't choose their country of resettlement. UNHCR decides for them. So I was talking with a family a couple weeks ago about what happened during their process. They received a call about the United States and had to make a decision if that was the place that they wanted to move or not, or if they wanted to stay where they were. So they weren't necessarily, they could have received a call and had Germany as an option or Australia as an option. They did not get to choose themselves. The next number is really important, and it's from 2018, so it's just a little bit dated, but usually our data when it comes to resettlement is at least a year backlogged. So less than 1% of refugees are resettled into one of 34 nations currently accepting refugees. So that's a pretty disheartening and crazy number when you go back to that 65 million refugees in the world. The United States resettled. Actually, this is an incorrect statement. We had our cap was set at 45,000. We did not hit that number or anywhere near it in 2018, but this was a sharp decline from previous years. When the Obama administration was in office, that number was closer to 100,000. The capacity number was closer to 100,000. And we are about a month away from an expected announcement that refugee resettlement will likely stop. And so we're kind of waiting on that news right now, but we've seen numbers just continue to drastically go down. Resettled refugees come from 70 different countries, but mostly from Syria, the DRC, and Myanmar. Here is another just graphic that kind of shows some of the other countries of origin. Again, this data is from 2018, but it's interesting to see when we think about resettlement in the United States, where are people coming from? So we're going to talk a little bit about what is this process of resettlement in the U.S. So you get the call after UNHCR refers a refugee family to the U.S. and they say, okay, yes, we want to be resettled in the United States. The government does a separate security check itself, even after the UNHCR has done security checks. So our process includes 8 government agencies, 5 different forms of background checks, 6 database clearances, and 3 in-person interviews. This process will likely take up to 2 years before a family enters the United States. I was just talking to a family who has a family member that has been waiting for 7 years after receiving the call, whereas their experience, it only took 3 or 4 months. And so it really, really can vary for lots of different reasons, but the average is that it takes about 2 years. Once cleared through this process, the State Department assigns the family to one of the 9 NGOs in the United States for resettlement into their new community. The top US states for resettlement are California, Texas, New York, Washington, and Ohio. We ranked 9th as of 2018, and we resettled 1,100 refugees in 2017. Myanmar was the most represented country. So I encourage you to do some more research on refugee resettlement and definitely just stay attuned to what's going on in the news as you join this community. It's important to understand kind of just staying up to date, because when folks know that you volunteer with us, they might ask questions and we want to make sure that we stay informed. But we're going to shift now and move to what does Syrian Community Network do? So the mission of Syrian Community Network is to empower Syrian refugees in achieving a seamless transition and relocation to the United States through connecting people to the right services and support networks. So our goals, we partner with refugee resettlement agencies so that we can provide supplemental support to newly arrived refugees and also to refugees who may have been here for 2 or 3 years, but certainly still need that support. We also connect refugees with appropriate services and community resources available, whether that be mental health resources or resources in terms of public health benefits. These are all things that our case management team might do. We want to foster a relationship between Syrian refugees and local communities, and we want to establish cultural competency for staff working with Syrian refugees, as well as for Syrians who need to learn about their new culture in the U.S. And I would also say that the cultural competency piece includes you all, right? Like our volunteers are some of our biggest advocates, and that is a really important part of your role. So we're now going to move into the youth services overview and kind of talk about what this department does as a whole. The youth services department falls underneath the education department. It's one of 2 branches. The other branches are adult ESL, but we're specifically going to talk about what youth services does. We have a few different components and programs within it. We're going to talk about that with number 1, the general overview, and then we're going to talk about your role at the after-school program. 3, tips and tactics for ELLs and tips and tactics for general tutoring can actually just be found in a document that was emailed to you in the same email as this training. So we're going to just let you look over that rather than kind of talking at you. You can just read it at your own time. So the after school program started officially about a year ago, the last school year, but kind of had a soft run in the semester before that. And it kind of came out of this place of knowing that our students have tremendous barriers such as language, social isolation, poverty, and navigating the school system. And so we knew that through an after school program, we would be able to kind of support some of those barriers. So the mission of the after school program, a community driven enrichment program for students in K through 6, seeks to combat these barriers that I just mentioned. In addition to homework support, ASP provides a safe space for supplemental academic support, social emotional development, and exploratory learning. We're going to talk a little bit about what that really means and what social emotional development and exploratory learning is and how that kind of comes to fruition in our space. Before that, though, we're going to talk about what does the after school program logistically look like. So we meet Monday through Thursday at SCN Community Network at 5439 North Broadway from 3:15 to 5:45 each day. We have designed this program specifically for, actually that should say kindergarten to 6th grade. We recently changed that. We had some preschoolers last year, but we're shifting to kindergarten to 6th grade this year. And then we do weekly activities and maybe homework support. We have a homework room. Sometimes kids will be with me with academic support, whether that be literacy or math. And then we also work a lot on social emotional learning. Amanda might do a different kind of activity that involves kind of exploring emotions and how to handle emotions, what to do with our emotions. But then we also do a lot of play at the after school program. We believe that developmentally, especially after school, our students need a space to play and to learn how to problem solve and kind of go through conflict resolution steps as they come up in an organic way. And that's actually where some of the most important lessons are learned at after school program. So this is a sample schedule throughout the day, or for each day. So we have students that will likely arrive between 3:45 and 4 o'clock, but snack time will officially start at 4 o'clock. As kids arrive, there might be some free play time, but then we'll shift into snack from 4 to 4:15. And then from 4:15 to 5 would be session 1. So if I'm a student, I might have session 1 with Miss Emily, which would be reading or phonics, or maybe outside time, depending on how the group is split up and who is slated for reading or phonics that day. The opposite group that is not with me, so I would have about 10 students, the opposite group would be with Miss Amanda, and they might be doing exploratory learning or outside time, depending on who is in charge of outside time today or that day. Exploratory learning or social emotional learning, as I mentioned, are things that we'll all take turns kind of leading different activities in. To give an example of what we mean by exploratory learning is maybe students are doing a science project and making slime. Maybe they're doing an art project with Miss Amanda and learning about different kinds of textiles and kind of being curious and exploring that. Maybe students are going on a nature walk outside and learning about different kinds of leaves. We really try to kind of keep it different, and so the after school program is a place where students can be curious and kind of connect the learning that they're doing in school with hands-on learning at our program. So the way these groups are split up is we'll have one group that's kindergarten to 3rd grade and then one group that's 3rd grade to 6th grade. So our activities might be differentiated to fit those students' developmental needs. So you are not part of the tutoring program, but you might be, and it might be something you're interested in learning about. Currently, we're not taking any volunteers for the tutoring program. It's kind of on hold as we're shifting into our new space and have a lot of different things going on. But it's still a program that is established here at SCN, and we do have some tutors that meet with our students. This was a match last year that you're looking at, Mr. Sharif and Omar. They're holding his Reading Achievement Award, which we're really proud of, and Omar is really proud of. But to read the mission, the tutoring program seeks to enhance the academic skills and confidence of SCN students through individualized volunteer tutoring. This program is really designed for students that are in middle school and high school. So that says 4th grade, but recently we have opened up our after school program up to 6th grade. So we're really looking at 7th grade to 12th grade students. Although if a parent comes in and says they want a one-on-one tutor to meet in the home of a student, and they're in 4th or 5th grade, that's not something that we say no to necessarily. We might explore different options, but if that's something that they really want, that's okay by us. And so it's flexible, but we do target middle school and high school. Tutors meet 1 to 2 times a week, typically in the home of the student. And students may be supported in the following areas. So maybe they're working on English or reading comprehension, math. They might just need someone to assist them with their daily homework rather than doing supplemental work. And they're really just working on problem solving skills and study skills. So outside of the tutoring program, the after school program, we have a summer program that is very similar to our after school program in structure. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It happens in the summer for about a month at a time. But another thing that we do that is less known maybe or more behind the scenes is that we do a lot of additional services for our students that might look like advocacy or social services within the school. So what I mean by that is we meet with teachers, administrators, other community members about how to best support our students. We attend parent-teacher conferences. We might go to report card pickup with families. We'll go to individualized education plan meetings. And if you're not familiar with what an IEP is, it's when a student has qualified for a specific plan to respond to maybe a disability that they're experiencing. We try to function as a liaison between the teacher and the parent. Sometimes that simply means providing interpretation, and sometimes it looks like trying to figure out how to navigate school enrollment or a problem that needs to be resolved in the classroom. Other things that we do, we connect families to mental health services as needed. We try to ensure all students have the materials that they need for school. We just had a big donation of school supplies as school is quickly approaching. So we have that going on in our office right now. And then another thing that we do kind of by request is we educate students from outside of the refugee community on what we do and why. So maybe myself or Suzanne or Amanda will go to a classroom that maybe is outside of Chicago or outside of the community. And we'll talk about what we do and kind of why we do it. And that's a really important part of our advocacy work as well. So we're going to shift into kind of your role at our after school space now that we've talked about that a little bit. And to do that, I want you to take a minute or two to think of the best teacher you've ever had and what adjectives would you use to describe that person. And this is really just to kind of get into the right mindset of what your role is, because you are an educator, an instructor, a teacher in this space. And so what were some of the best qualities that you saw in a teacher as you were going through your educational experience? So in thinking about those adjectives that you just thought of, we're going to talk about your role at the after school program. So I already kind of went through the schedule, and so I'm going to go a little bit out of order in the bullet points here. So the first thing you might do when you come in is support setup. Amanda and I might be getting snack ready, and that might be something that becomes your volunteer role. And then on the end, the flip side of that, you'll also help us tear down the program. What's really exciting this year is we're really not going to be tearing down the program so much as just cleaning our space, because we have a permanent space rather than renting out a classroom like we did last year. And so that's really exciting for a lot of different reasons, but also on the logistics side of things, it's going to take less time. And so we're excited about that. And so rather than tearing down the program, we might just do different cleaning tours, different things that we might just need to do before we close up the office for the evening. And so Some other things that you might do throughout the day, supporting a small group of students. So typically our groups will be 10 and 10. And so within that, we might break the students down into 2 or 3 subgroups. And so you might have 2 to 5 students that you're working with on an activity that is planned by myself or Amanda, or maybe you're just outside with students, but it'll be a relatively small group of students. Probably the most important thing is that you're building authentic relationships with students. We know that students don't learn when they don't feel cared for by their teacher. We know who our best volunteers are by who the kids get excited about when the volunteer walks into a room, right? Kids are very intuitive, and if you are not engaging with them or don't seem interested in them, they're not going to be interested in you. And so that's definitely something that I encourage you to do, is get out of your comfort zone, even if you're new working with young people, and just try to get to know them. The next thing is that you'll be engaging with students even during free time and snacks. So this kind of goes off of the last bullet point. Even if you don't have a direction from myself or Amanda, assume that your direction then is to just hang out with the kids. And that's something that, again, we might not specifically say, but we don't want to have to specifically say. We want you to be able to engage with our students without having to be asked. And so during snack time, feel free to sit down and share a snack with a kid, talk to them about their day. Maybe in the free time before everyone gets there, you engage in a board game or a building game or coloring. There are lots of different options in our space that can kind of help break the ice if you're a little nervous. Obviously, helping students learn, reviewing content with them, providing problem-solving support, and checking their completed work if you're in the homework center, which is kind of a sub-room within our larger youth program area. And then this is kind of the point where it is helpful for you to go look at that PDF shared called Tutoring and ESL Tips and Tactics, for some more tips and suggestions when you're working with students that are bilingual or trilingual. So we're going to talk about some after-school program dues. So let Emily or Amanda know if your student is having a hard day. Do greet students by name. They're going to get to know your name when you get to know their name. Tell students what they're doing right. One thing that you might hear myself or Amanda do in this space is positive narrating. So it might seem a little silly. It honestly feels a little silly sometimes when I do it. But if I say, okay, everybody, I need your hands up and your voices off, I might say, Amira is ready and listening. Thank you, Amira. I have Adam's eyes looking at me. Thank you, Adam. And rather than calling out the kids that aren't doing what I've asked and that maybe aren't following a direction, I highlight the kids that are. And that usually sends a signal to the other students that might be lagging a little bit to get on board without having to kind of have that negative energy in the room. This is a really big one, and it's super important. It seems so silly to have to say this, but when one of the signals might be like, when I raise my hand or say, give me 5, that means that students are supposed to stop talking, stop what they're doing, and turn and give the attention to the instructor or the student that is leading. And so when a teacher raises their hand, please stop what you're doing and raise your hand as well. This can be frustrating because maybe you're in the middle of a really great conversation, or maybe you're playing a game, or maybe you're working on a homework problem even. What we run into a lot is volunteers might not follow the direction right away, and then the instruction completely loses its validity because students see that the adults in the room aren't following the direction, so they're not going to either. So even if it means you have to pause and it's a little bit annoying or not a good time, please still do it, because there are 20 plus people in the room and it's never going to be a great time for everyone. Again, it seems like, yeah, of course I'll follow that direction, but when you're in the moment, it is hard to stop what you're doing right away. And then finally, we kind of talked about this in the last bullet point, but we want students to be encouraged to engage in a game, puzzle, or even just a conversation with you when you arrive. Here's some after-school program do nots. I'm going to be really honest with you. These do not come from things that we've seen volunteers engage in when we've been in our space, and we want to be really explicit about what we don't want to see. We want to create the best space for our kids. So we don't want to reprimand a student in front of other students. This doesn't mean you can't redirect a student or remind them of the task at hand. There's a difference between kind of scolding someone and saying, you know, this is what we're supposed to be doing, and Miss Emily has already asked you. There is a point where the conversation should move to a more private space, though, if it does turn into something that's a larger conversation that other people maybe don't need to listen to. And we also want to make sure that staff is present. And so if you need assistance with that, definitely come and find a staff member. However, it's likely that we are already there and can see what's kind of happening and might kind of take the lead in a scenario like that. But if we're not there, please don't hesitate to say, hey, I need some help over here. We also want to make sure that you are not helping a student with homework that you do not understand yourself. There's definitely a wrong way to teach things, and I think the best example of this is the new way that elementary students are learning math. It's very different from the past generations' math lessons, and so it can be a little confusing, and there might be phrases or directions that don't make sense. And in that case, please refer to a staff member, and then if we can't figure out what the direction is and everyone is still confused, that's when we kind of practice advocacy for that student and practice, okay, well, because we don't understand this and neither do you, we need to ask your teacher. So let's practice asking your teacher for help. What are you going to say? And maybe do some role playing. We don't want you to get to a point where you're going to lose your patience. The after school program can quite honestly sometimes be a tough place to be. We're working with kids in their after school hours, which is sometimes some of the toughest hours of the day for everyone, right? Everyone's getting tired. They've been in school all day, around people all day. There might be a lot of emotion, and we're going to kind of talk about that in a little bit. Or a lot of past trauma in one room. And so we want you to be able to take a breather if you need to. And there's absolutely no problem in you doing this. We want you to feel healthy and happy in our space too. Please don't ignore students. Kids know when you're not paying attention to them. They can see when you're on your phone. Obviously, sometimes that can't be avoided, but if it can, please don't sit there on your phone. It's really, really disrespectful, and kids feel that. Okay, so we're going to talk about responding to challenging behavior. So first of all, we want you to respond calmly with a redirection. So make sure you're being clear about what the expectation is. Oftentimes kids just didn't hear, weren't listening, or you weren't being clear. I wasn't being clear when I asked for someone to do something. We also want to offer choices within the expectations. So if it's a reading time for students, okay, you don't like this book, let's find a different book. If it's game time, you don't like this game, let's go look at the game boards and find out which one you do want to do. We have so many different games and so many different books in this space that there's lots of different options that we can kind of build into whatever activity that we're working on. Sometimes what we need to do is take a break or change the setting. Like I said, this can be a really hard time of day for kids. They might already be tired, ready to go home. And so maybe it's just as simple as saying, you know what, let's go to the back patio and just kind of take a breather together. Or let's go throw a ball back and forth outside. And obviously this step would require communication with myself or with Amanda, but it's definitely something that we encourage to kind of think about challenging behavior with the student and be able to kind of shift behavior. And then we also want to discuss alternative behaviors after there has been time to cool off. So maybe you go outside, you throw the ball back and forth, the student has kind of regulated. You can talk about what could we have done when we felt really angry rather than throwing the game, or what could we have done rather than yelling at our friend when we didn't agree on something. And that might be a good step. The other thing that we do, and this isn't in a slide, so I apologize, but we have 3 steps of communication when we have a conflict with another student. And so the first step is that we take a break from that student. So the peers take a break if they need to, not be around each other. I always ask the students if they feel like they need a break or if they're ready to talk. The second step is that students communicate with one another. So one student will share what they felt using I statements and what they saw using I statements, and then the opposite student will paraphrase what they heard the student say, even if they didn't agree with what happened. And then vice versa, the other student will get an opportunity, and there will be paraphrasing done by the opposite student. And then we do reparative work. So what do we need to do so that this doesn't happen again? How can we fix this problem? And the kids that are returners for after school are incredibly great at this process. They know how to talk about their feelings. They know how to talk about what went wrong. And so hopefully we get to a place where, for the most part, students are really kind of handling these conversations on their own, but sometimes they do need directions from us. If you don't feel comfortable facilitating one of these conflict resolution practices, you can definitely come get myself or Amanda or perhaps a youth program intern that might feel a little bit more comfortable with navigating a challenging situation like that. So these are just a list of seven things that can prevent challenging behavior. So like I said, we want to have clear directions and expectations. We want to be consistent. We want to have choices for students within whatever activity we're doing. Positive narration can help get students on task without having to kind of bring that negative energy into the room. We want to make sure we avoid surprises. We do this by having a schedule every day with students' names. They know where they need to be and when, and that really helps prevent any sort of surprise that might not feel good to students. And then of course we want to make sure we're having fun, and we want kids to know why they're doing a certain activity. So that's important as well. So our last section is trauma-informed volunteering. So we're going to kind of go through what is trauma. We're going to talk about the risk and protective factors. We're going to talk about recognizing trauma, general guidelines, and then suggestions for challenging situations. So first of all, what is trauma? So an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. And so we definitely at Syrian Community Network understand trauma as a series of events. It's a linear experience, right? It's not something that happens and is done. It is something that might be ongoing. So some risk factors in thinking about students that might be experiencing trauma or might have experienced trauma. So they might have a previous history of trauma. They might be experiencing social isolation. An unexpected event might occur. Their inability to act during a certain event. If they're already experiencing ongoing trauma, and then just thinking about the complexity of trauma can also be a risk factor for students. One thing that I want to mention about all of these is that when we think about the first part of the training with the refugee resettlement process and kind of moving to a new place, a new city, maybe experiencing barriers such as language, poverty, navigating a completely different city and system of living, these can all be triggers and can all kind of cause traumatic experiences within themselves. So we know that trauma inherently kind of lives within our community just because of the different experiences that our community has often had. So now we're going to talk about some of the protective factors that we try to provide at the after school space and just kind of at SCN in general to make sure that we're kind of providing a space that responds to trauma. So obviously social support is huge, and one of the biggest kind of protective factors that we might be able to provide. We want our students to have a strong connection with a caregiver, with teachers, having adults in their lives that validate what they're feeling and help them navigate how to respond to those emotions. Socioeconomic stability is a huge one, and that's something that kind of looks at the broader team at SCN in what we do. So we have a case management team that really allows us to look at our family in a holistic way. While students might be downstairs in the after-school program, their parents might be upstairs receiving social services that help them kind of keep that socioeconomic stability in place. Access to healthcare is also related to that. We want to make sure that students are provided with access to healthcare, but also that their family and their siblings are provided access to healthcare as well. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you might look for when you're recognizing trauma. So these are some different behaviors you might see. So maybe irritability, maybe students are easily startled, maybe they have problems concentrating or sitting still, trouble sleeping, traumatic play, disassociation, so just kind of not acting, just disassociating from the space or where they are or what they're doing. And then excessive attempts to get intimate contact. So maybe a student is really kind of overbearing when it comes to wanting to be touched in terms of like holding a hand or hugging. Sometimes a response to trauma is just excessive attempts in that contact. I also just want to mention that these, irritability, easily startled, problems concentrating, are often misdiagnosed as ADHD. And so that's something that we kind of watch in the community, or we communicate with a psychiatrist or psychologist or someone at school that might be working with an individualized education plan, is that we do try to kind of bring that up and make sure that we're considering that possibility of misdiagnosis when it comes to maybe prescribing medication or putting a label on a student that might not actually be accurate. Some thoughts and beliefs that we might see students have, persistent negative beliefs about the world, really negative emotions, and that might come out through behavior or maybe even just like explicit language, students saying negative beliefs and thoughts about the world, and then also feeling alienated or separated from peers. So we're just going to, now that we've kind of established what it might look like, what it is, we're going to talk about some general guidelines when we're thinking about working with students that are experiencing trauma or have experienced trauma. So we want to establish a connection based on mutual respect. We believe at Syrian Community Network that our students have just as much to give us as we do to give them. And so we really want to avoid having a power dynamic, but rather provide students with autonomy and also just like the respect that they have a lot to share and teach us as well. And that kind of goes into the next one. We want to approach the child as a full partner and decision maker in their lives, in their activities from day to day, things as simple as, do you want to do this activity or that activity? We have the ability to really provide options at after school, and we want to make sure that students feel part of those decisions. We want to be consistent and give reasonable consequences. And so that's why we really try to provide the language when we're going through conflict resolution, and that we're really consistent in how we respond to different challenging behavior, because we see the most growth and success. And honestly, that's just fair, right? To be consistent, kids know what to expect. We like to know what to expect from our boss, from from someone that might have authority over us. And so rather than thinking about it that way, we want to think about being a partner and being a consistent responder in those situations. We want to receive behaviors as data. Someone said this to me about a year ago, and it really helped me sort of shift my thinking of challenging behaviors as a problem that needs to be solved in that moment as something that is informing me about this child. And so when I kind of shifted that, I was able to really step back and think about the picture more holistically, which is really, I think, a more successful way of thinking about maybe a challenging scenario. Then the final thing is recognizing the importance of play. I talked about this when we were talking about our after school program in general, that we believe that children being able to kind of share what they've learned and learn more through playing together is so valuable and so important, not only for young children, right? Not only for, we know toddlers, having time to play and kind of imagine is so important to their developmental growth. That doesn't stop there, right? We want to make sure that our kids have the opportunity to play and explore throughout their childhood. So here's some suggestions if your child becomes dysregulated, if you think maybe they're responding to trauma or have been triggered. We want students to know that you are there. So tell the student, I'm here, and reflect back on what you're seeing. Maybe you say statements. I statements are always good. I can tell that you're feeling really mad. Or if this XYZ happened to me, I would be sad too. And just really validate that feeling. We want to maintain connection. So we don't want to be, or we don't want to leave. So we want to be there for them. And if you have to leave to go get myself or Amanda, the youth coordinator, you might find someone who can stand in for you. Luckily, we're in a space that is relatively, it's not huge. And so being alone is sometimes this is a problem. Being alone is not always an option. And so likely there'll be someone who can kind of sit there with the student, another volunteer, or you say, hey, can you go get Emily or Amanda for me? And you can then stay with the student. Another really helpful thing, and I actually find this really helpful in my personal life, bringing them back to their bodies. So doing something physical or repetitive. This is kind of where I mentioned going outside and throwing a ball back and forth, playing pat a cake, going on a walk, maybe doing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's 5 things you see, 4 things you smell, 3 things you hear, etc. Or playing I Spy. Sometimes our students might reveal part of their trauma history with us. And so, first of all, if that is happening, that is likely because your student trusts you. And that's a really, really important thing. And we want to make sure that we respond appropriately to that trust. So we don't want to assume things. We don't want to probe further. We want to listen to what the student is bringing to us thoughtfully. We want to respond with sympathy, again, using those I statements. I'm sorry that happened to you. Thank you for sharing this with me. We want to stay with the child. This is a really big one and it's hard, but we don't want to try to fix it because likely it's not something we can fix, and we don't want to make false promises. We don't want to act like we can. I think it really is our job in this space to validate and to listen. If the child reveals an incident of physical or sexual abuse, you must tell Emily, and you need to explain to the child that you have to tell her in order to keep them safe, or tell me in order to keep them safe. This is also something that I can navigate with you if you want to come, reveal something to me or tell me something. We are mandatory reporters. When we have a follow-up call with you, we'll talk about what that means when we're going through your volunteer contract. But I definitely can explain to the child that, Mr. Brad wasn't breaking confidentiality to disrespect you, but it's our job to make sure you're safe. And so when you tell us a secret that might show that maybe you're hurt or you're not safe, we have to do something about it. Otherwise, we keep your secrets, and we're people you can trust. And so kind of explaining that to students is something that I can definitely do with you or without you. We're going to make mistakes in the after school program. Working with kids can be really hard. We have a lot of different kids, age groups developmentally at different places. And so when you make a mistake, make sure that you say you're sorry, be specific about what you're sorry about, empathize with the student, and then maybe say you're sorry again. I say I'm sorry constantly in the after school center. I might take a student aside and say, I'm really sorry for acting more frustrated than I should have. That wasn't fair. I do that frequently because it can be really hard to maintain kind of a clean slate every day, or with a student after you've had a really challenging time with another student. We carry those things around with us, and so just being honest about that and checking yourself in that is really the most important thing that you can do. Here are some exercises to do if you get triggered by a child. So just take some time to read through those. If you need to leave the space, we definitely feel okay with you doing that. We want, like I said, this to be a safe and positive space for you to be in as well. So finally, that is my goal, was to be right around 45 minutes, which is right around where I am. So at this point, you have homework. So you have received a corresponding worksheet. I think it only has 5 or 6 questions. Please send it to me. We will not have the call with you until we know that you have filled out this training, because we want to be able to answer questions about the training and kind of use some of the training to explain the volunteer contract. And so without you having to do this, we don't want to talk to you yet. So we really look forward to you kind of filling this out, sending it to us, and then we can move forward and get you started in the after school program. Again, thank you so much for taking this time, and we look forward to talking with you. If you have any questions about the worksheet, obviously don't hesitate to reach out via email or even just calling myself. We will be in touch soon. Thank you.